Hi, Erin, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Well, I say great, but I'm also in New York with the orange sky, so it
Oh
is.
yeah, I'm from New York, so I have a lot of friends and family posting photographs, and it
It's
looks so apocalyptic.
yeah, it really is like it does feel like Blade Runner 2049, which is like all of the
Wow,
jokes I've seen, but that's what it feels like.
that's insane.
Yeah, which well, it's funny that Tribeca is happening. I'm like, how are these movies to like
Yeah, that's really true. I'm really curious to see because is it something that's going to
I,
stick?
I think until Sunday was the rumor.
Holy shit.
Yeah,
Okay, so I'll be there for it. That is so bizarre.
yeah. It's a journey, but it is funny to watch, like to look at this guy and kind of watch this movie where it's like people's in the desert the entire time.
Mm.
So I was like, oh, this is just like New York City right now. But it's such an interesting kind of dynamic that you and Jai Courtney kind of build in this film, and it's so rooted in kind of like a love that we don't even get to see on
Mm.
screen anymore. So how did you two kind of work on that so that when they do have those moments where
Mm.
you're like, why are they even together? You can still see that there was a love.
Mm. I think, what's funny about Jai and I is that we have totally different approaches, but we balance each other out.
Mhm.
And it was really fun because we got along so well as friends that it's a perfect example that everyone has sort of their different approach. And it's a matter of coming together and being open to that person's approach. And for example, I might rely on preparation, and he is so present and he forces me into being present. But I think that, it was sort of about, um, if I can speak for him, which I think the only reason why I know this is because we rehearsed and we discussed it a lot, is our individual objectives or motives that we had originally in our marriage and in our relationship were rooted in just wanting to deeply love each other. But we happened to be two people who came from either limited or dysfunctional backgrounds that inhibited us from loving each other in a functional or healthy way. So it's sort of that heartbreaking dichotomy of feeling a very real, legitimate love towards someone, but also being either damaged enough or conditioned poorly enough that your ability to love is so hindered. And how much do you blame the other person? For example, with his character, I think it was, in my mind, all about the nuance. And rather than demonizing that character, realizing that if you come from a world and you're damaged and traumatized enough, your expression of love, it's impossible to express it in a free and healthy way.
Yeah. And I especially love to like not to just jump to the end, but I like the end when that woman comes to like she's talking to Gina and she says like, "Oh, he's
Mm-hmm.
like you it's a bad way of expressing love, but I understood his motivations.
Mm,
Like, oh, I don't own a horse, but the implication is that he thinks he owns a woman, and it's
right.
like I understand your thinking. Don't love
Mm,
it. I get it now. But
yeah.
what I do love about Gina as a character too is like you can see glimpses of this personality that she kind of wants to let shine, but is
Mhm.
continually pushed down, especially with like her art. What were some things that like you personally like wanted to bring to her as a character to make those kind of pop throughout the film?
Well, I wanted it to be palpable that, whether you are someone like Gina and you're born in a small town and your husband that you love is also your suppressor, or you're someone, I had such a different upbringing from Gina, but I think that one of the coolest things about watching a film that involves a character that's so niche, that grows up in a world that's so different from our own, is, especially as women, there are often parallels we can find there.
Mhm.
And I grew up in New York City, and I grew up very much encouraged to pursue interests and passions, and was not suppressed at all like Gina is. And yet there are certain societal ways of being conditioned and suppressed that I just became aware of as I was trying to dig deeper into Gina, are almost impossible to transcend.
Mhm.
And those things were definitely heightened and magnified when I became an actress, and in ways that I was aware of and wasn't aware of. And so for Gina, it feels like she as you said, so badly wants to allow herself to express herself in some ways, and meets this couple from New York City. And it really comes at a time when she needs it. And it's just perspective expanding enough that she takes action. But I think for myself, you know, I felt very much like there were aspects of my identity that were suppressed to be malleable. I
Mhm.
think women as empaths can be very malleable, very much people pleasers, very nurturing, and it can be excessive.
Mhm.
And then at what point does that become too much? And you're sacrificing yourself for the other people in the room or the other person in the room. And I feel like Gina's manifestation of that is different and perhaps more extreme, but I very much related to that. So it's that sort of collective mindset that I find to be common amongst women, and breaking through that and being able to embrace and own the fact that you deserve to take up space in a room.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think the way you described it, we had similar upbringings in the sense that like I got to explore things and do what I wanted and things like that. But then you see the societal pushback when you
Right.
are a woman who was like, oh, I'm a nerd, I'm this, I like to do this. It's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the people in your lives, but others. And what I really liked too about this movie is Gina is so different kind of from the other character you're known for, Annie, who is also kind of pushed down by societal norms. For you though, like these two women are so different, but yet so kind of they have that problem where they want to do something and people are telling them that they cannot do it.
Mm-hmm.
What's it about exploring that in acting and in film and television that is so appealing to you?
I think what's appealing to me is that I think what's appealing to me is examples or situations where it seems like there are young women that are up against so much that as an audience you can observe them and think, how are they going to be able to fight this, but then they do, and they are able to continue to stand up for themselves. And it's not a linear progression, but ultimately in both cases they are, maybe not in even the ideal way. I think that's really important too, is like these female protagonists that are flawed and are doing the best with what they can, and might make decisions that are amoral, but we need to find sympathy for that. I think it's that you ultimately see them stand up for who they are and refuse to no longer make sacrifices for themselves. And I think if you see that, most of us are in situations that are really, really challenging in their own right, but these are really extreme examples. And you see that. And I think more examples of women standing up to harder and harder situations in terms of however suppression manifests in their lives makes us feel like in our daily lives we can do these little things that add up to being self-defining moments.
Yeah. And I do think too, I don't know if you guys talked about it, but one of my it kind of like hit in at the end. It's so interesting
Mm-hmm.
that Jai Courtney is in this movie kind of an imposing figure over you because you are like so much smaller than he is in certain scenes. For then Gina to be the one that wins in the end, essentially. Not wins because that's a bad, you know what I mean, though, like being the one who is on the path to kind of better herself. It's interesting to see that kind of visual dynamic. Was that something you guys
Yeah.
talked about, or was it just kind of
You know, we didn't explicitly talk about it, but I do think there was something in that, of course, because, um, you know, there's sort of been for so long this evolutionary thing that the simplistic view of things, which is like the bigger version of the animal or the species is the superior one, because, life used to be a lot simpler in terms of survivalism. And now we're able to, because we have the privilege to and the technology to, become a bit more cerebral and I would say neurologically oriented in society around jobs and positions of power, and it feels like the more and more intelligence becomes relevant as the predominating strong characteristic in people, as opposed to whoever can fight off some sort of, I don't know, life-threatening animal. It feels like that's almost a threat to men. Like it feels, to me, it's really interesting that it there can be someone like a man who comes across as well as stereotypically strong, that a woman would normally be intimidated by, that is ultimately deeply sensitive and insecure and aware that life is no longer determined by survivalism.
Mhm.
And I think that men and women have a hard time adapting to that. So I think it's cool. But I also think the other thing is like, ultimately, he is the weakest character in a way in the film.
Mm.
But I don't say that in a bad way. I mean, he's vulnerable. He's so vulnerable and he knows it. And that's heartbreaking. And then you take someone who is, aesthetically smaller and looks less stronger, and they're the ones that are able to summon their strength. So I think it's just changing our perception of strength in terms of size and gender, and in 2023 acknowledging things that are more relevant that haven't been. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. For one last quick question, obviously, what I do love, you kind of talked about it earlier, but I do love that you cling to messy women in your work. And I for one am very happy that we're getting a lot more messier women throughout
Mm-hmm.
TV and movies, and they're not perfect or evil, they're just messy. Uh,
Mm.
and what do you hope kind of you get to do next with your career? Like, is there one kind of genre or character that you're looking forward to kind of tapping into?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's, yeah, I wish that I could curate everything that comes along in my career, but it's more so a matter of things kind of being thrown at me and seeing what sticks. And I wish I could say it's very conscientious, or to the degree that I feel like it's being curated. I will say, sort of going back to what you said, is that messiness, that sort of like, I love that one side effect that I didn't anticipate is that with characters, one of the most important things I can do is, by playing them, I can't judge them. So even with the darkest roles, finding some sort of motivation in something perhaps that happened earlier on in life to condition them to behave this way has just expanded my empathy. And so I would love to explore roles that are either the quote unquote good guys, but still very flawed. So we can continue to kind of show the gray areas and moralities, and that you don't have to be consistently morally perfect to be good, or explore characters that are darker,
Mhm.
but sort of, instead of having them be one dimensional, multi-dimensional, and show why they're dark. Maybe they came from a tumultuous childhood or whatever that may be, just so like we can kind of expand the way women in TV and film are played and written in general, and just get into the fun details.
Yeah, thank you so much for talking with me today. I
All
really
right, thank
appreciate
you.
it. It was great getting to know
Yeah, thank you.
you.
Likewise.
Have a great one.
You too.